Today we're going to look at the impossible. We're going to look at the value of a human life. I'm not talking about breaking up a human being into its component parts, but the actual value culturally, socially. So, how do we go about this? Now, we're told in Western societies, especially Australia, which considered itself to be an egalitarian community, that human life is equal. The value of a human life is equal. Obviously, that's a lie. It's not equal. Not even in this country. Now, what got me thinking about this was the difference between the West's attitude to what's happening in the Ukraine and what's happening in Gaza. We've just heard the European Union will be donating 80 billion to assist the Ukrainian war effort, while in the United States the type of support which they'll give is dependent on the Senate, where the current bill is held up. At the same time, we saw countries like Australia, United States, Canada, ceasing aid to Gaza in the midst of the carnage, because 8 members of the United Nations Relief Centre in Gaza, which employs over 30,000 Gazans, were involved on the attack in southern Lebanon on the 7th of October. Now, over 2 million people, 2.3 million people, now face starvation because of that decision. At the same time, when you look at media coverage of what's happening in the world, you'll find that the death and destruction that occurs around the world, whether it's famine, whether it's drought, whether it's floods, whether it's war, whether it's carnage, whether it's inter-cyanide conflict, we find that we really bear or show little interest in the number of casualties and the pain and the suffering. And when we talk about a civil war in Yemen for over a decade, little interest. We talk about a dislocation of 8 million people in Sudan in the last 2 years, little interest. We talk about hundreds, including children, dying in Gaza every day, no interest. But the fact that 3 US soldiers are killed in a drone strike on the border of Jordan and Syria, world news in the Western media. So it's a lie to say that the value of human life is equal. Even in our own society, let's look at the pomp and ceremony which and the coverage when somebody with wealth, a billionaire, is involved in a particular project. And think of the publicity and the interest shown in the people who are homeless and the millions who are having difficulty dealing with the current situation. The changes to the tax legislation by the Albanese-led Labor government highlights this. The news was all about the people earning more than 180,000, whose tax cut will be reduced in half from around 8,000 to about 4,300. Not the 95% of people who will receive an increased tax cut. So there is no equality, not just in terms of opportunity, not just in terms of human endeavour, but no equality in terms of the value of a human life. Now, obviously, philosophically, the value of the human life should be equal, but it's not. And it's not for a variety of reasons. It's not because of culture, it's not because of media, it's not because of social relationships, it's not because of a host of other issues. And the value of life in our society, whether we like it or not, is related to the amount of disposable income people have. If you have enough disposable income to send your children to private schools or afford private health insurance, well, obviously the value in terms of the opportunities which the people, your family or your friends have, is much more different, radically different, to somebody who finds themselves living below the poverty line, although they may receive social security benefits. So there is no equality as far as the value of a human life is concerned, whether it's overseas, whether it's here. Now, one policy that public interest before corporate interest has been promoting for a number of years is a universal basic income. Now, the idea of a universal basic income isn't new. The Romans, yes, the Romans, 2,000 years ago, introduced a universal basic income for the plebeians, the workers, who are citizens in their society. And the reason they were forced to do this was to prevent social dislocation, rioting, and possibly overthrow of the ruling classes in Roman society. Because what happened with the expansion of the empire and the expansion of slavery is that citizens who were not part of the ruling classes were no longer needed to create wealth, because that wealth was created by slaves who weren't paid. So in order to deal with the situation, the Roman Empire, the Roman Senate, the Roman emperors introduced two concepts: bread and circuses. Bread, which means looking after the basic needs of that section of the population by subsidising rent, subsidising food, and circuses by having a huge amount of public holidays where people went to the Colosseum to watch, the latest cruelty. Up to 238 days in 365 days in terms of public holidays. Now, we find ourselves in the same situation in 2024, not because of slavery, but because of mechanisation, industrialisation, the digital revolution, and now artificial intelligence. Not everybody in society needs to work to create the wealth which is needed in order for this society to function and prosper. So society is faced with a huge issue. What will happen as more and more people are forced onto social security benefits because they're no longer needed in the workforce? Because our workforce has been based on the concept that everybody needs to work in order for society to function. So what is a universal basic income in the 21st century? It's a very simple concept. By introducing a universal basic income, which is a fixed amount for every citizen and permanent resident to deal with their basic human needs. A fixed amount. Not an amount like a social security benefit which keeps you below the poverty line, but a fixed amount which allows people to live a lifestyle they wish. You could be a billionaire and you could be a social security beneficiary and you would receive the same fixed amount, maybe as a weekly allowance, automatically into your bank account. This does a number of things. The first thing is that it removes the needs for these huge social security bureaucracies which have grown up, which decide who is eligible and who isn't eligible social security benefits, because everybody at birth finds themselves in the same situation as far as income is concerned. So you can release hundreds of thousands of public servants from basic work which is irrelevant in terms of production and profitability is concerned, to be deployed in other areas like the climate emergency, disaster relief. At the same time, you may find that many of these public servants will decide that they will just survive on their universal basic income. At the same time, you may say to me, well, it's unfair that a billionaire gets the same weekly allowance as somebody who was on social security benefits. But the difference is that through the tax system, if you're an investor, because you have disposable income, if you are still in the paid workforce, what happens is the more you earn, the more of that universal basic income you're given every week goes back into the treasury. So what does a universal basic income do? A universal basic income decreases social dislocation and increases opportunity for the individual in society. Not everybody wants to be involved in paid work. Not everybody is going to be satisfied with a universal basic income, and many people's view of themselves, view of their worth is tied up with the work they do. And some people may work just a few days a week, others may work full time. But the fact is, what a universal basic income does is it values human life. It says at the beginning, we are all equal. It values the contribution of the individual. It is a mechanism where everybody does not have to belong in a paid workforce, which in the majority of cases people do just because they need to survive. Because with increased mechanisation and the digital revolution and artificial intelligence, we could easily, very easily reduce the workforce. And considering that we've got an ageing population, the fact is that the sooner we reduce the number of people that are involved in the paid workforce through the provision of a universal basic income, the sooner we'll have the facilities and the people to assist that elderly category in society. So what is the value of a human life? Well, the value of a human life is determined by a number of things. It's determined by where you are born. If you're born in Australia and an Australian citizen, your life is much more valuable than somebody who's born in Yemen. Not in terms of, not philosophically, but in terms of the potential that you are able to achieve because of the environment you find yourself in. If you're born in a family that has lots of disposable income and steady income in this country, the opportunities you are able to pursue are much greater than somebody who's burdened by a HECS debt and needs to work while they're going to university in order to survive. So there are fundamental differences in terms of value, practical value of a human life. Fundamental differences. And these fundamental differences have now become ossified. We now belong in a society where there is a caste system based on economy, where you were born, who your parents are, the luck of the draw. And what a universal basic income does is actually break down those divisions and allows and increases the value of an individual's life. Not just philosophically, not just ideologically, but practically in terms of opportunities. Now, some people may never want to work in the paid workforce and are quite happy being productive in an artistic sense, productive in a variety of senses. I mean, we've reached the ridiculous situation in the society where you need 2 people in a family to work in order to meet your basic commitments. Now, it may be that one or both partners may want to spend their time bringing up their children and don't want to be part of that paid workforce doing meaningless, repetitive work in order just to pay the rent. Obviously, the main issue with a universal basic income in a capitalist society is individuals and corporations attempting to maximise their profits by increasing prices. So in a society where there is a universal basic income, you do need price control, especially if it's a capitalist, a private investment for private profit society. Of course, if you don't have those controls, those legislative controls, it's quite likely that prices will increase dramatically as people try to maximise profits because of the universal basic income. So universal basic income is a contract. It's a contract between the individual, it's a contract between society, and it's a contract between the legislative apparatus which is in place, whose main function is to protect people from exploitation. It was done 2,000 years ago, we can do it today.